public session. I welcome members and also viewers who may be watching our proceedings on Oireachtas TV to the public session of the Oireachtas Select Committee on Foreign Affairs and Trade and Defence. The Dáil on the 19th of December 2018 ordered that the revised estimates for public services in respect of the following votes be referred to this committee for consideration, namely Vote 27 International Cooperation, Vote 28 Foreign Affairs and Trade. At today's meeting, the Select Committee will consider in the following order the estimates for Vote 28 Foreign Affairs and Trade and Vote 27 International Cooperation report back to the Dáil. On behalf of the Select Committee, I welcome Antónis, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade, Deputy Simon Coveney, Minister of State with responsibility for international development and diaspora, Deputy Kieran Cannon. I also welcome officials from the Department and thank them for the briefing provided in advance of today's meetings. The proposed format of today's meeting is that the committee will deal with the votes on a programme-by-programme basis. Antónis will give a brief overview of Vote 28, and at the outset of the consideration of each programme, Antónis may give an overview of the programme, including outlining any pressures likely to impact on his department's performance or expenditure in relation to the programme in 2019. The floor will then be open for questions from members of the committee. I ask that members put their questions on the specific programme in order that we can progress in an orderly and efficient manner as possible. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. I remind members and witnesses to turn off their mobile phones or switch them to flight mode, as they interfere with the sound system and make it difficult for parliamentary reporters to report the meeting. They can also adversely affect television coverage and web streaming. Members receive briefing documents and revised estimates and now invite Antónis to make his opening statement. Antónis.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity. I'm pleased to be here this afternoon to present to you and to the members of the Select Committee the revised estimates for my department for 2019. Today I'll focus on Vote 28, the vote for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and my colleague, Minister of State Kieran Cannon, will address you afterwards in relation to Vote 27, which deals with international cooperation, which is obviously the bulk of the expenditure that my department is responsible for. Last month, the Taoiseach and myself and Minister Cannon launched A Better World, Ireland's new policy for international development, and reaffirmed the government's commitment to making progress on delivering the UN 0.7% target by 2030. A Better World sets out our vision for Ireland's contribution to international development, looking forward to 2030, and is a statement of Ireland's commitment to global citizenship. Expanding our development cooperation is an investment in a better, safer and more sustainable planet. Members will have seen the advance briefing notes provided by my department on the two votes, which summarises the main activities and priorities under each expenditure programme, corresponding with my department's high-level goals. For 2019, the overall gross estimate for Foreign Affairs and Trade group of votes, which is 27 and 28, is 802 million, compared with 754 million in 2018, an overall increase of 48 million euros or 6.4%. The Vote 28 allocation sees an overall increase of 19 million or 8%. The Vote 28 priorities for 2019 include, as you might expect, Brexit, the passport reform programme and the operational side of a passport service dealing with a significant increase in the number of applications. Northern Ireland, the expansion of the overseas mission network under the Global Ireland 2025 initiative, provision for urgent capital building and security works in our missions abroad, continuing investment in the Department's global ICT network and addressing increased operating cost pressures abroad across the mission network. Budget 2019 understandably had a very particular focus on Brexit readiness measures, and further initiatives and information have been rolled out since. From my own department's point of view, I secured additional funding to increase staffing and capacity at HQ and in key Irish embassies, and for the Brexit preparedness communications team, which have been very active since then. Under Global Ireland 2025, I'm pleased that we have been able in recent months to open new embassies and consulates general in Vancouver, in Wellington, in Santiago, in Bogota, in Mumbai and Amman, with openings to follow this year in Cardiff, Frankfurt and Los Angeles. The Government's overarching ambition under this initiative is to ensure that Ireland is well positioned to secure our national interests, particularly economic interests globally. Our expanding network will enhance Ireland's visibility globally, extending our influence, and will position us for trade and investment growth in new and existing markets. It will also benefit our citizens travelling overseas and will involve reaching out to our diaspora and exploring new platforms for engagement. The programme structure for Vote 28 corresponds with the Department's strategy statement 2017 to 2020 and also mirrors the priorities as set out in our foreign policy document, The Global Island, Ireland's Foreign Policy for a Changing World, which sets out the Department's work in 5 priority areas: supporting our people, engaging actively in the European Union, promoting our values, advancing our prosperity and strengthening our influence. These correspond directly with expenditure programmes A to E, which are being considered here today, in the revised 2019 estimates volume. As has been proposed, Mr Chairman, I'll now proceed to make some short introductory comments on Programme A to open the discussion. And once we complete our discussion on this programme, I'll then take each of the programmes in sequence. I ask the Committee's forbearance in speaking in a little greater detail on Programme A, as it covers so many key policy areas for my department, including Northern Ireland, consular services and assistance, our emigrant support programme, stroke diaspora funding, which Mr Cannon is primarily responsible for, and the passport service, including the passport reform programme. I wish to quickly update you on developments in these important areas in service of our people. The aptly named title of this programme. Work under this programme includes the effective delivery of passport and consular services for our citizens, supporting our emigrants and deepening engagement with our diaspora, sustaining peace and enhancing reconciliation and political progress in Northern Ireland, and increasing North-South and British-Irish cooperation, which is certainly needed in these days. The amount allocated for current expenditure under this programme in 2019 is £77.7 million, compared to £73.4 million in 2017, an increase of 5.8%. This programme is about our people, Irish citizens at home and abroad, and covers a number of key priority areas for the Department. Under consular services, together with the passport service, the provision of consular services and assistance lies at the heart of the Department's engagement with citizens. As Irish people continue to travel in greater numbers than ever before, and to ever more remote and exotic locations, the demand for consular assistance has increased significantly. In 2018, my department provided assistance to Irish citizens in over 2,343 serious consular cases. Regrettably, this included assistance in over 292 cases where Irish citizens died abroad. A new consular strategy has been developed to address the growing and often complex demand for information and assistance. The strategy outlines how the Department will prioritise modernising and improving the service provided to Irish citizens in distress abroad. Our crisis planning and preparedness team continually reviews the Department's travel advice and works closely with our embassies abroad and external organisations to prepare for major events. For example, planning is currently underway for the Rugby World Cup in Japan in 2019. The Passport Service issued some 860,000 passports in 2018, the highest number ever issued in a single year. This represents an increase of over 10% on the previous year. We expect the number of passport applications to continue to increase through 2019. I announced on the 16th of March that more than 230,000 applications had been received so far this year, representing, which is, I think, extraordinary, an increase of 30% on the same period last year, which was a record in itself. Target turnaround times for applications depends on the category of application. Online applications, which now represents over 70% of all applications, are being processed in less than 2 weeks, and in fact over 50% are being processed in less than a week. First-time applications of necessity take longer because of required entitlement and identity checks. We have taken on board the lessons learned from recent peak seasons and are implementing enhanced measures to provide quality customer service processes and in particular to manage our overall demand and seasonal application increases. This is being done by the recruitment of additional staff, reorganisation of production processes and administrative arrangements and continuous implementation of service improvements through the Passport Reform Programme. I think we learned an awful lot of lessons last year, actually, Chair, in relation to pressures in the passport system, partly because of a period of extremely bad weather when we had to shut the system down for a couple of days, but also just through sheer pressures coming from volume. So we've anticipated those pressures again this year, and I think we've responded pretty well so far. My department works closely with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform to seek to ensure the passport service is adequately resourced with sufficient permanent staff throughout the year. Over 80 new permanent staff have been assigned across all of the offices since the end of 2018. In addition, and in response to the general increase in applications during the busy peak season, sanction has been received to recruit 230 temporary clerical officers to assist in passport processing. Over 160 TCOs have already been assigned, with the remainder due to be in place in the coming weeks. A further response by the Passport Service is the establishment of a new dedicated customer service hub. The hub is resourced to deliver an effective service to members of the public who contact the office with queries by telephone or web chat. More than 70 staff are already in place, with a further 30 staff due to commence in early May. So we've had a very significant recruitment process underway now for a number of months. As part of the Passport Reform Programme, the second phase of the online passport renewal service has rolled out in November of last year. This facility is now extended to the renewal of children's passports. Introduced a passport card for children and expanded the cohort of adults eligible to renew online. The online service, which is available 24/7, 365 days a year, to applicants renewing their passport anywhere in the world, brings significant benefits, with faster turnaround times and greater customer satisfaction. The online service has been instrumental in terms of the management of the overall passport operations and in allowing the Passport Service to allocate staff resources more efficiently to cope with the unprecedented demand. Further developments planned in the reform programme for 2019 include an automated mailing project, a business process automation project, additional work on the online renewal service and the ongoing improvement to customer systems. The 2019 allocation includes a capital allocation of 5.5 million in respect to the Passport Reform Programme. In terms of immigrant support and diaspora issues, through the Immigrant Support Programme, a budget of 12.575 million, an increase of 1 million from last year. The Government provides funding to non-profit organisations and projects to support our most vulnerable immigrants abroad, to strengthen global Irish communities and to facilitate the development of closer and more strategic links between Ireland and the global Irish. This important budget supports the Government's vision of a vibrant, diverse global Irish community connected to Ireland and indeed to each other. I'm aware of the increased concerns among some members of our Irish community abroad, given uncertainty arising from the British vote to exit the European Union and challenges facing the undocumented Irish in the United States. The Immigrant Support Programme is an extremely important tool for the Government as we continue to work with Irish community groups and immigration centres to address current needs and concerns, and to ensure appropriate support is offered to Irish citizens everywhere. A separate diaspora affairs budget line of 600,000 is managed by the Irish Abroad Unit. This diaspora affairs expenditure will be targeted to strategic projects relating to the diaspora that support the work of the Interdepartmental Committee on the Irish Abroad and existing government structures, government strategies. in particular Ireland Connected, the International Education Strategy for Ireland, Creative Ireland and the National Tourism Strategy. I commend the work of my colleague with us here, Minister of State Cannon, in this important area and his role as Minister for the Diaspora, and he'll take any questions that you have in this area. This programme also deals with matters relating to Northern Ireland. In the context of the current political challenges within Northern Ireland and the potential impact of Brexit, it will be no surprise that this area of work is a particular focus now of my department. From the outset, protecting the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement has been a key priority. Throughout the negotiations on Brexit, as you know well, there has been a strong understanding from our EU partners of the need to address the unique circumstances on the island of Ireland. In 2018, the Reconciliation Fund made grants to cover 100 projects supporting organisations across the community and voluntary sector, mostly based in Northern Ireland. These groups are building meaningful links across community, addressing the issues that are impacting on their lives, including sectarianism, and are working to create better understanding between people and traditions on the island of Ireland and indeed between Ireland and Britain. Clearly there is still vital reconciliation work to be done, and that work may take generations. I believe civil society has a really important role to play in this, including by shaping a more reconciled and cohesive society. The Reconciliation Fund is an important expression of our support for this work. In recognition of this, I have announced in May of last year that the Reconciliation Fund budget would increase by $1 million to over 3.7 million for 2019. So in percentage terms, it's a huge increase, even though it's only 1 million in the context of the overall budget. So I'd welcome any comments or questions from the committee members on Programme A. I suspect that this particular estimates session is probably less about the money and more about the policy, which is often the case in the Department of Foreign Affairs, with the exception obviously of the development aid side, where there's a huge increase in expenditure from last year to this year, and that increase is hopefully going to increase significantly as the years pass between now and 2030, when we want to try to get to the target of 0.7% of GNI.
I now take questions from members. Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan.
Thank you very much. You're all very welcome. I'm not too sure what kind of questions or criticism you're expecting from the size of the delegation here today. Okay. First of all, I want to acknowledge A Better World and the extent of the work that went into producing it. And it was very obvious that the launch out in UCD, the very positive response that it received from everybody who was there, NGOs, civil society, everybody like that. So that was a really positive start. One general comment, of course, all increases are welcome. I noticed in each category nearly, the administration pay and non-pay are the ones that have gone up. 860,000 new passports, it's mind-boggling nearly. Do we know where they're all coming from? I presume Brexit accounts for a major amount of them.
Lots of these are renewals.
Okay, yeah. All right, okay. It was just that it kind of gives a different impression. Obviously, we get, when we're embassies and the request for embassies and missions, and the way in which you have decided this particular number, and I know that there are some who are disappointed by that, so will you be considering more as time goes on? And, you know, I was just struck by the last comment there about the reconciliation work that's still to be done and the work that may take generations, but we're putting money into reconciliation, but yet we haven't really addressed the legacy issues. And I just find there's a contradiction there. So it's just really those points on it. I have questions on the other ones. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Deputy O'Sullivan. Thomas, Chair.
Yes. Well, first of all, on legacy, I was in the Shannon yesterday and we had actually a very good debate on legacy and reconciliation. I thought it was you know, I thought the debate had some depth actually. Different political parties were giving different perspectives, and I thought the approach towards that debate was what we need to have more of on the issue of legacy and reconciliation, so that victims and their families from all sides and from all communities can get the truth that they seek, and the justice as well, if it's possible for that. So, we are quite active on the both reconciliation and legacy agenda, working with the British government, but also passing our own legislation here. If you speak to, for example, Kingsmill families, they will have concerns about accusations of collusion on this side of the border, and they will want questions asked and answered. And so we are passing legislation. Minister Flanagan's bringing it forward to allow for inquests that are taking place in Northern Ireland to be able to effectively have hearings in a court in Dublin, where a member of a Garda Síochána could give evidence or answer questions, if that was appropriate to do in the context of some of the legacy inquests that are currently happening or may happen in the future. So this involves both governments passing new legislation. Obviously, we are going to insist on the full suite of measures and commitments that were committed in the Stormont House Agreement. And we need legislation passed, or we need to see legislation passed in Westminster to make that happen. And we will continue, obviously, to advocate for that. And then there are other cases as well, obviously, Dublin Monaghan, where the Irish government continues to have a very clear perspective on this, which is consistent with motions that have been passed in the Dáil and Shannon, and will continue to advocate accordingly. And obviously, some of the recent decisions in relation to Bloody Sunday and so on really heighten the focus on legacy. Also, the inquest into the Ballymurphy killings and so on. So we're very much in tune with that and are part of that debate, and I hope we can achieve the kind of language, but also the sort of structures that we need to be able to move many of these processes forwards. In relation to new missions, well, the Department of Foreign Affairs has never been expanding at the pace that we're expanding at right now. As I said earlier, new embassies opening in Bogota, in Colombia, in Santiago, in Chile, a new mission a new embassy in Wellington. I'm glad to say, considering what has been happening in recent weeks in New Zealand, where Ireland really wants to show as much solidarity as we can. A new mission in Vancouver, for obvious reasons, because it's just physically so far away from the embassy in Canada, and there's such a strong Irish community there now. To opening up a new embassy in Amman in Jordan, because Ireland is taking an increasing political interest all of the time in the Middle East peace process, and also funneling a lot of aid money now into many of the humanitarian operations that are operating across the Middle East in terms of Syrian refugees and so on and so forth. So, I've only outlined in terms of Vancouver, Wellington, Santiago, Bogota, Mumbai, Amman, Cardiff, Frankfurt and Los Angeles, what's happening in the last 6 months and the next 6 months effectively, but we're also going beyond that. We've given a commitment to open a new embassy in Morocco, a new embassy in Kiev, in Ukraine. We're opening in Liberia, and probably will increase our presence further in West Africa. So, we can only do this at such a pace that allows us to be able to do it efficiently and cost effectively. It involves a lot of increased staff numbers as well, but I think we are doing it as quickly as we can, and we're targeting, I think, the right places in terms of both political interest and economic interest. Most of the countries where we're investing, the EU already has a trade agreement in place with. So, for example, we will be investing very heavily capital infrastructure in Tokyo, where we're building a new Ireland House, which I think is probably going to be the biggest capital expenditure that we've ever had in a facility like this. And it's not a coincidence that the EU has just signed a trade deal with Japan. And likewise in Canada, increasing the emphasis there, because the EU has a trade agreement in place with Canada, just like it has with both Chile and Colombia. So this is essentially Ireland growing and expanding globally, and we'll continue to do that. But it needs to be planned, structured, and there needs to be a proper strategy and a thought process behind it. And just finally, on a better world, I mean, Kieran and I think, agree on this. It's one of the things that both of us really wanted to do while we were in this department, was to modernise our approach to development, which is already really good, but I think we can take it to a whole new level. While we deliberately made that policy document relatively short in terms of reading it, there's a lot of significant content there, and of course behind it there is a very significant financial commitment that future governments, I hope, will honour, because it's going to put huge pressure on whoever's in government over the next 10 years to try and find over 100 million a year, every year, of increases for our development strategy. It's a big ask, and I hope we'll be able to maintain an economy that can fund it. But that is where we're going. But Kieran will have an opportunity to talk about that later on.
Thanks, Taoiseach. Deputy Study.
Yeah, just on these sections in particular, I welcome the briefing and the points that the Minister has raised. In relation to passports, it's phenomenal, the growth, but I think it's not unexpected in some ways. I don't know where the increased income from these passports is reflected in the figures. Are they cost neutral? I understand you don't have.
We don't get to hold on to it, unfortunately. It goes straight into the exchequer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, it just wasn't. It's not reflected. But obviously,
yeah.
if you're printing, what is it, 860,000 passports, there's a cost. So there's a cost out, one way or the other, and there's cost of administering the machines. And I saw you've reflected the cost of the increased personnel that's required, and you have, I think, 230 temporary staff as well as new staff. So it might be there, and just I didn't notice it.
There was an income last year of about 60 million that came in from the increase in terms of the fees charged and so on.
Yeah, is that over the cost of
Well, that was a significant increase on the previous year.
No, I meant, is it over the cost of producing? So sometimes.
Oh, it is, yeah, it is. Yeah.
So you have a case to look for an extra 60 million off the Minister because you've been contributing.
It's not quite that simple, but I'll come back to you in a second.
Yeah, the argument, and it's in some ways because of the amount of passport requests come from the 6 counties, and you've heard this from my party and other parties in the 6 counties in the past, is to open an office, a passport office in Belfast. And I know a huge amount is done online now, but there's still a demand that in the consular service or somewhere that there would be an office in which there was a passport office. And I know myself just some of the difficulties people face sometimes in emergencies and that. And if you are making 60 million, it would lend to the argument that you could approach the Minister for Finance and say that some of that money could be ring-fenced to staff and office in Belfast or Derry or somewhere in the 6 counties which could accommodate that. On the emergency consular assistance, it's great to see the increase in relation to not great to see the increase in the numbers that are looking for it, but that there is a lot more being helped. And on this, there are certain cases. You mentioned 292 people who have died abroad and who have been helped by the consular services and that. And there is a group which do tremendous work, the Bell Trust Fund, and I don't know whether the department funds them or helps them in any way, given the work that they do and others in repatriating those who have passed away abroad, and sometimes those who are stuck abroad, in need of medical transfer back home. It is an area, obviously, with people travelling a lot more and working abroad a lot more, that it's good to see that there's a new consular strategy there, but it might need additional funding just to help in cases of distress or where there isn't insurance or the proper insurance to help families cope in those distressful circumstances. In relation to the North-South cooperation, again, I have absolutely no problem in welcome what you said about the additional million in the reconciliation fund. I think a lot more could be spent in this area, because all told, I think it's about 6.5 million if you take out the money for the diaspora and the like. That's under the title A6, I think it's called, or under that programme A. So if you take A6 and A7 together, that's kind of just short of, well, it's just over 6 million now, 6.5 million. And given what we are facing in the future, and the demands that you rightly recognise for truth and reconciliation from both communities, I think we need to look at ensuring that the funds are there. I know yesterday, or maybe it was before that you met the family of Patsy Kelly, an independent councillor who was murdered in Tyrone by the UDR. So it's the likes of families like that who are looking for a proper investigation. In the main, they're not necessarily always looking for financial support to try and get the truth, but sometimes they do come up against logjams. They need your support, but sometimes that can involve legal costs, and that not every family has the wherewithal to get solicitors and that on board. So, and if I know one of the organisations that has done tremendous work in the past is the likes of Pat Finucane Centre, and they have helped represent some families who have got some progress in looking for truth. In other cases, there's a huge frustration from them. Let's see this. I think that's nearly it.
Yeah, okay. I mean, Deputy, we have looked at the idea of a passport office in Northern Ireland. The vast majority of applicants received by the Passport Service from applicants residing on the island of Ireland are submitted through Passport Express and Northern Ireland Passport Express. Northern Ireland Passport Express allows applicants living in Northern Ireland to apply for their passport through more than 70 post offices. So we're now seeing a big shift online as well, where 70% of the renewals and rising are now happening online. So the only circumstance where somebody would need to go into a passport office is if they're travelling for emergency reasons and their passport isn't in date or something like that, and that's a relatively small number, and people come to the passport offices either in Dublin or Cork for that, whether you're living in the west of Ireland or in the northwest of Ireland. That can be quite a long travel, but that doesn't mean we should be opening up passport offices all over the country or all over the island for that matter. So I'll keep it under review, but at the moment, all of the trends are to shift online or to have a fairly efficient express post system that allows us to focus the resources on turnaround times and obviously keeping people informed in relation to their own applications. In terms of the repatriation of a person's remains when they've died abroad, I'll be honest with you, this is something that I'm not that happy with right now. I mean, I think that while yes, there is a fund there, and I think we do provide some financial resources to that fund, there is a question as to whether or not the state should do more to help families financially to get a loved one home when someone has passed away, and we've had discussions within the department on that issue. So I would say that that's something that we'll continue to look at, but there's this constant discussion that we need to have around encouraging people when they go abroad to take out insurance, to cover themselves for the cost of an accident or a fatality, and if we make policy decisions that essentially the state will pick up the tab, well then people won't take travel insurance in some cases. So there's a sort of a competing issue here, because obviously there are some very tragic cases where the state should be intervening very directly, and families literally can't afford to bring people home. But I mean, so far the approach has been to support essentially a charity that helps to fund the cost for families, and that's been the recommendation to me for the reason that I outlined. But I think it is something that we need to, given the numbers that I outlined earlier, which are quite significant. Some of those will be very difficult cases that will put families under a lot of financial pressure, and I do think we need to.
Irish citizens abroad who are living abroad, but their family might be here, so they wouldn't necessarily have insurance.
No, I mean, I take that point, and I wouldn't like to be sort of in any way dismissive of that. I think that's a real issue that we need to constantly keep under review. In relation to the reconciliation fund, look, I mean, we've increased it by €1 million, which is essentially almost increasing it by about 25%. I'd like to see us continuing to increase that. I hate to say it, but I mean, I think politics in Northern Ireland and the relationship between communities is in quite a fragile place right now, and I think we may well have to invest a lot more, both time and financial resources, to try to work with UK authorities as well to try and ensure that, regardless of what decisions are made in relation to Brexit, that we can maintain a calm and support in particular community leaders who are reaching out in a very responsible way through many of the programmes that we fund at the moment. I take the point. It may seem like a small figure, an extra €1 million, but actually when you look at taking it from 2.7 million to 3.7 million, in percentage terms, is actually a huge increase.
Absolutely no problem. Welcome, and like yourself, I think it'll be a lot more.
So look, I mean, that's programme A. Like, I don't think there's anything controversial in it. They're modest increases in important areas.
Bring in Deputy McLoughlin.
Thanks very much, Chairman Taoiseach, and Minister Cannon, you're very welcome. Just in relation to Taoiseach, in relation to Brexit readiness, I see we have additional staff. Are you happy that you have adequate staff to cater for what's going down the line, and what we don't know what the final outcome is yet, but I think are you satisfied and happy that you have adequate staffing to cover all of the various in headquarters or indeed in the Irish embassies throughout the length and breadth of the areas that we're talking about? Also, I welcome under Global Ireland 25 that you are opening additional embassies and consulates in various places, and I think that perhaps maybe there are a number of other areas that we could and will be looking at in the near future. In relation to the consular assistance, and I'd like to put on record my appreciation for the wonderful work that's been done, because I've had a number of cases over the last couple of years, and particularly in the last number of months, Chairman, where I had one very, very serious accident, person with obviously no insurance, and another fatal accident, and the work that was done by your consular people is to be commended, and I think that the families, and I'm sure I'm speaking for a lot of the families, both between the Department of Foreign Affairs and indeed that other group that you mentioned as well, that they've done exceptional work, and I think that it's vitally important, because what families say to me is that at a time like that, they're so far away, they know what information they're getting or whatever else, but that to have people on the ground to help and assist them in relation to a very, very tragic or very, very sad occasions. In relation to certainly the passports, and I suppose each and every one of us as public reps are inundated on a daily basis in relation to additional passports. It's phenomenal the amount of work that the passport services have done in issuing 860,000 passports in 2018, the highest ever, and continuing to rise. And I think that these people, it's only right and proper that we would acknowledge their work as well. I was often asked in relation to a location in the northwest, but I suppose with the online systems now for passports, this is removing a lot of the problems for people, because this is a very, very successful issue. This is very, very successful where we're going to now with the online, and I think that's very, very important. And I'd just like to also, in welcoming Minister Canning in relation to the diaspora issues, that we are making huge progress in various parts of the world that we didn't before this, and I'd just like to acknowledge your presence and indeed your commitment and the work that you're doing in relation to that. I suppose, Taoiseach, we talk about Brexit, but also in relation to Northern Ireland going forward, and you know, the Reconciliation Fund is for, you know, as a member of the Good Friday Agreement, we have met with a number of various groups that have benefited from this funding and from this money. It has been very well supported, and I think that it's only right and proper that we would continue, because many various groupings have benefited as a result of that. So, Chairman, that's my contribution.
Thank you, Deputy McLoughlin.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Tony, just on the staffing side on Brexit, I mean, the biggest impact for us from a staffing perspective is actually on the passport side. I mean, we obviously have a communications unit around Brexit as well, but in terms of sheer numbers, you know, it's we've seen a huge increase in the numbers that we've taken on to make sure that we have an efficient passport delivery service. The other areas across government departments that have taken on significantly more staff in the context of Brexit are obviously areas like the Department of Agriculture, Revenue, agencies linked to the Department of Jobs and Enterprise. You know, as you'd expect, more people taken on by Enterprise Ireland, IDA, Board BIA, and also in some cases in Leo offices and so on. So, like across government, there's been, in my view, there is sufficient resources in place, but we'll obviously have to keep that under review. I mean, if there's a no-deal Brexit, that puts a lot more strain on the system. It will, and if we have to manage the competing challenge of trying to protect the integrity of the EU single market while at the same time preventing physical border infrastructure on the border, that's also going to involve more resources, but and it'll involve a plan that we work out with the European Commission if we have to do it unilaterally with ourselves and the Commission. Hopefully that won't be needed, but if it is, then obviously we're planning for that too. But you know, if we have a no-deal Brexit, the expenditure across multiple areas, particularly in terms of support programmes in vulnerable economic sectors like agriculture, will be very significant, and that's something that obviously Minister Donoghue will factor in terms of the Department of Public Expenditure. But from our department's perspective, we really play a coordinating role here, as opposed to actually taking on hundreds of people to be in Dublin Port or Rosslare or Dublin Airport or somewhere else. But in terms of communications and coordination, yes, we have more people. We have bigger teams in some of our embassies, London, Paris and Berlin being the obvious examples. But I am satisfied that we've put sufficient resources in place from a staffing perspective. But as I say, in a no-deal scenario, everything changes and we have to gear up for that. But certainly, as of today, I'm happy that we're in a reasonably good place.
Thanks, Thomas. A brief question, Deputy Snoddick, on this programme.
Yeah, just it's a follow-up on the passport one. The point you made is taken that most of them are online, but even in your response, if you have Cork and Dublin, that leaves kind of a lot more of the country without any passport cover in emergency. You have to get to Dublin. Like if you're at the far end of Donegal, never mind Derry or into the six counties, you have a long way to travel to Dublin, and especially if it's an emergency. And they're the cases I've dealt with. And in fairness to your own office, and they've been very helpful in the past in terms of helping where people would contact the office in emergency it's a good facility to be able to contact somebody who can give us advice. So it's just to reiterate that there will always be a cohort who will not be able to do online applications, and there will be practicality or kind of strange cases or emergency cases which need some access to a personal or a person, and it might be that it would be rolled out maybe more rather than just Passport Express where you put the material in through an envelope, but that there is something to kind of helpfully check when they're doing that, which is often what the delay is, like people send in material and they forgot to do this, that and the other. Maybe that's something. I don't know, were we dealing with the embassies and that in this section? Yeah, just asking in relation, is there any plans to reopen one of the embassies that was closed in the past due to financial constraints, which was Iran, and also just to welcome the opening of the other consular services. We had the advantage when there was the group travelled here to Washington of seeing kind of the great work that's done there, and the consular service there and the ambassador explaining to us what was going to be rolled out and how kind of this might cost money, but it is cost effective in terms of kind of the benefits Ireland gets and in terms of investment in the country. So I'd encourage more of the same as you have outlined.
Thanks, Deputy Thomas.
Yeah, no, just on the passport. I mean, the reality is that the only place where we can print passports in an emergency is Dublin. So even in Cork, if you go into the passport office to try and see someone at the desk, they can't print it up for you there and then. The other thing is, though, that a lot of people who need passports quickly are obviously flying out of Dublin, which is by miles the busiest airport in terms of just simple throughput. But I mean, I think we are moving, though, or trying to move this process to a place where we can do a lot more online in terms of interaction. And as the technology allows us to do more and more and more, I think the geographical location of where where passports are printed will become less relevant. But look, I take the point, and we will keep it under review. In relation to missions that have been opened in the past and were closed for financial reasons, in Cardiff we are reopening. In fact, we're opening next month in Cardiff. There's no plans at the moment to reopen in Iran, but that's something that's been raised with me on a number of occasions. But it's not on the list at the moment. I think there were the two questions.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Thomas, just with regard to Northern Ireland, and I'm conscious of the pressures at government level, both here and in London, are there talks at official level between the administrations, the Irish administration, the British administration, and the political parties in Northern Ireland in relation to the need to try to progress talks to have the Assembly and Executive restored? The last time you were with us, you didn't indicate to us that there was any particular optimism of when that necessary progress would be achieved. Just with regard to the Reconciliation Fund, for relatively small money, it has been very successful over the years. Different officials in your department have done a great job working with communities right throughout Northern Ireland and in the border counties as well, and they did exceptionally good work and still do. But that programme is beneficial. But if we don't deal with the legacy issues, there is still so much hurt and anxiety. And the way many of the atrocities, it's decades since they were committed. Families who have not got the truth, who have not seen justice, they're getting older, they fear that their lifetime will be ended before they get the truth in regard to how they lost a loved one, a family member. I know for myself, from dealing with Monaghan and Dublin families, victims of the Monaghan and Dublin bombings, Belturbet, other ones in the border area as well. And those people are becoming increasingly anxious, worried, angry, understandably, that we're making no progress in dealing with those particular legacy issues. So I don't think we can emphasise enough to try to get the message across that it is a priority issue for all of us in public life. Because at times those families can understandably think that these issues have gone off the agenda. I think it's very important that we send out the message as an Oireachtas, and you do it as a government as well, that we continue to pursue with the British government, the Northern Ireland authorities as well. Because far too often people can say to me, we know who committed that crime, we know who murdered that person, but that person has never been brought to justice, unfortunately. So I think of the legacy issues, and I know the framework is there in the Stormont House Agreement and the Fresh Start Agreement to make progress in that respect. And you mentioned the legislation being progressed here, but it's an area, regardless of political pressures, on so many fronts. And naturally, we won't have the progress until the Assembly and the Executive are restored. And similarly, the importance of the North-South Ministerial Council, it's often written out of the political agenda as well. I think it would have been extremely important and beneficial if it was functioning over the past 2 years, whether at plenary level, the North-South Ministerial Council, or at sectoral level. So, Minister, or Taoiseach, I should say, are there any plans at the minute for talks to resume between yourself and Secretary of State Bradley and the political parties represented in Stormont?
We did have a meeting with the leaders of all the political parties a few weeks ago in Belfast. It was an exploratory meeting, really, and the parties outlined their positions. All parties said that they wanted to get back into devolved government structures again in Northern Ireland, but there was a fairly direct conversation in relation to the expectation from different parties in terms of what was required to do that. I think the truth is it's very difficult to create the platform or the political environment for compromise where parties will accommodate each other's concerns while the Brexit cloud still hangs over Northern Ireland. I think that political parties are very much focused on decisions that are being made in London at the moment, even though many of the political parties aren't represented there. But I mean, I have regular conversations with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland in relation to assessing, you know, when is the right time to try to bring parties together again. I don't think we can force those meetings and have another failure on our hands. I think that would be very damaging. I think the public have grown increasingly cynical and disillusioned, quite frankly, with the political system in Northern Ireland, and we all will have to work hard to try and re-establish trust that Stormont can work and make the right decisions for people, regardless of where they come from and who they are. But unfortunately, Brexit has had a desperately polarising effect, not just on political parties, but also communities. The focus of discussion in Brexit is back around identity, constitutional issues, tribal debates, and of course the tension around many of the legacy cases at the same time has reinforced that in the context of, you know, the Finucane family who continue to ask, and we support them, for a full public inquiry. Obviously, in relation to Bloody Sunday and the decisions around a prosecution there, the inquest in Ballymurphy, the ongoing inquest in relation to Kingsmill, you know, this has created difficult political debates without an assembly and an executive that can give political leadership to help communities get through what is a very difficult process when it comes to reconciliation. So that's why I said earlier, you know, I think that Northern Ireland is in a very fragile and difficult place, and we need to be very careful with the language we use and the decisions we make. But if we can find a way of creating some certainty around the Brexit process, which hopefully can happen in the next days and weeks, I think then there will be a window. Because I think all parties in Northern Ireland recognise that there's a need for more localised leadership, if you like, coming from Stormont, and we will certainly work very, very hard with the British government to try and make that happen.
Thanks, Taoiseach. We'll move on then to programme B. Taoiseach.
Look, I don't think we'll need anything like as long a debate on Programme B. Apart from the pay and the non-pay elements, where the increases basically on the non-pay elements relate to Brexit information and campaigning and communications primarily, and the pay elements relate largely to pay restoration decisions. The other areas in terms of actions around EU engagement and other actions linked to our membership of the European Union, there's no real budget increases there of note. So if people want me to go into it in detail, I can, but I don't think there's any controversy here. It's relatively small amounts of money, and it's playing our part as a member of the European Union.
We move on. Deputy O'Sullivan.
This is one comment, and it's because having attended two of the common security policy CSP meetings, the most recent in Bucharest, I would have real concerns on the increasing talk about European armies, etc. And I just want to make that comment on this. There's very few voices at that level who are talking about other ways of dealing with issues besides a European army. That's all.
Yeah, just to put it on the record, every time there is that kind of discussion, an Irish voice normally intervenes to remind people of what our constitution says and what our policy is in relation to military neutrality. So, of course, we're absolutely committed to the European Union and its future, but there are different perspectives here. And the complexity of common foreign and security policy is to try to accommodate those perspectives in different ways. But Ireland, through our triple lock system, will decide if and when Irish troops travel to different parts of the world. It won't be decided by somebody else, and that's something that we remind people of on a regular basis.
Thanks, Taoiseach. Move on to Programme C. Taoiseach.
Programme C. Programme C, again, I think pay and non-pay is pretty straightforward there, and then the other is contributions to international organisations. In 2009, this 2019 allocation of 34 million is essentially at the same level as was revised in 2018 and reflects the best estimate of mandatory contributions to international organisations in 2019. On behalf of the State, the Department is committed to paying assessed contributions to international organisations in peace, security and human rights. Contributions to the UN, which is the largest single contribution, are set in accordance with a rolling 3-year schedule, which is negotiated by the UN Secretary, and they're based on a percentage of Ireland's GNP. So, again, this is pretty much a non-controversial area linked to commitments that we've made, and it's rolled over a 3-year cycle.
Similar to the last one, the funds kind of seem to be staying the same, but one of the international organisations, well, several of them, that we would be making contributions to would be the likes of the UN, and the fact that we seem to be going to be paying less into them, although minuscule amounts, seems to fly in the face of our commitments in terms of the UN and also in terms of the environmental degradation around the world. Because do we expect to have to make larger increases to these international organisations in the future, in particular the UN, because the world seems to be becoming more volatile again, and the UN may be needed to address the peace and stability in some areas, but also in terms of the environment. And separately to that, it's the whole question of human rights and protection of human rights internationally. And again, kind of this committee has done a lot of work in that. And is this the place where we should be increasing our contribution, or is it just demand-led? Whatever the UN asks us, we grant them rather than looking to specifically increase. Like, there's a whole area of the businesses and that don't respect human rights, and corporations which need to be held to account for abuses of human rights and violations and environmental degradations. You know, do we or should we be supporting international organisations which seek to tackle those in particular?
Thanks, Thomas, Chair.
Yeah. I mean, this isn't our total contribution to the UN, right? So this is a contribution to UN organisations that are subject to calculations that are made at a UN level in terms of commitments that have been made on this 3-year cyclical process. We make a whole series of other contributions to UN agencies separately. So whether that's, you know, the World Food Programme, whether it's UNHCR, whether it's, you know, environmental NGOs, and Kieran, I'm sure, will talk to you about that when he comes to his vote. And we are increasingly investing through UN organisations in what is, you know, by and large untied aid. Sorry, entirely untied aid, and that's as it should be. You know, I mean, we're looking to sit on the decision-making body of the UN Security Council in a few years' time. You know, Ireland's foreign policy is very much shaped by EU membership and by UN membership as well. So, but what this under Programme C is most of the expenditure under this programme relates to Ireland's mandatory contributions to international organisations, of which we're a member, including the UN. The 2019 estimate reflects the best estimate at the time of mandatory contributions due this year. It should be noted, however, that the challenge of forecasting the UN peacekeeping budget in particular, which is the largest part of our payments to the UN, isn't an easy one. It's difficult to estimate this in advance, as the existing peacekeeping contribution might be expanded or reduced depending on the circumstances, or a new one might be established. Also, UN contributions are invoiced in US dollars and therefore subject to currency fluctuations. The complexity of the UN budget process and the negotiations of contribution rates for all UN participants makes this budget difficult to quantify at any stage of the year. So this is an estimate that may go slightly up or down depending on a number of things, whether there are new peacekeeping missions required, whether exchange rates change slightly, but this is our best guess at this point in time.
A 3-year cycle.
That's right,
Is 2019 the middle year or the end year of that cycle?
End year.
End year, so we could see an increase next year.
We could, yeah, we could.
Thanks. Programme D, Thomas, Chair.
Programme D. Yeah, so Programme D, I think pay and non-pay is pretty much self-explanatory. Again, there's no increases in the other areas, but Promoting Ireland, the published allocation is at the same level as 2018. Funding under this programme enables the Department and its mission network to raise Ireland's profile internationally, support local and regional trade and economic initiatives, and organise cultural activities. D4, then, contributions to national and international organisations. This allocation is set at the same level as last year. It mainly covers Ireland's contribution to the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and also includes some smaller contributions, including the Asia-Europe Foundation. So, again, small amounts of money there, but that's what it's for.
Okay. Deputy O'Sullivan.
Again, it's just a point to make that it was a long time, the business and human rights policy was a long time coming, and we finally have a chair of a committee. And while this all sounds very fine here, unless we are putting into action what is in that policy when it comes to Irish business, and I would hope that policy is part of the work that is being done on our trade and economic interests, that we are leading by action and not by having a policy sitting on a shelf and not being implemented. And we don't want to hear of Irish companies who are involved in dubious practices, or certainly in relation to workers' rights and decent pay. So again, it's just to move the policy into activity.
Yeah. No, well, we have a very good person chairing that now. can't remember whether you were at the last meeting we had on it. I think maybe you were.
Coming into us.
Yeah, are they coming into you?
We hope, yeah.
No, well, look, I mean that has to be part of Ireland's sales pitch, essentially, abroad in terms of who we are and what we're about, and part of how we promote what we do across our mission network. I suspect, as we see quite a significant increase in the number of missions that we have, this is a budget line that we may have to increase in the years ahead. But for this year, it's more or less the same budget as last year. I think there are €1,000 in the difference or something. It's small.
Thanks, Deputy Stundig.
Yeah, just very briefly, it's kind of D3 promoting Ireland. Given the context of the year that we've had, or the years we've had, and the years we probably will have in terms of Brexit, and that I would encourage greater funding of such programmes, given that, as I've said, kind of when I've travelled abroad, the investment in promoting Ireland abroad pays huge dividends to Ireland. It mightn't necessarily come back into the Department of Foreign Affairs budget, but kind of the rest of Ireland and our standing internationally kind of is helped by that investment. So it's a pity it's only increasing by 1,000. It should be kind of massively increased, and there probably is other programmes which are related to it, which I think I've seen as well. But just to encourage the Minister, I think it's just logical.
I mean, just to say that this budget often allows our staff to coordinate the expenditure from other departments. So, for example, Board B and Enterprise Ireland would have quite a lot of funding here. So I wouldn't like to suggest that through our embassy networks we're not spending more money promoting Ireland. We are. I mean, we just had the largest ever St. Patrick's Day programme by some margin. I think it was 56 countries were visited in total. But each minister's department will pay for their individual travel programmes and so on. So, but this is to fund our existing team to be able to coordinate, and you're seeing a lot more joined up thinking in terms of how we promote Ireland in terms of New Ireland houses. It's not just Tokyo; it's in many other parts of the world as well. So, just to kind of reinforce that point.
Said there was a parliamentary delegation in Washington recently, which I was on, and the work of the staff, the embassy staff, and those who are assigned, if you want, to us, God forbid, we took them away from work that they could have also been doing, and it's to encourage that, to kind of and appreciate the huge level of work that those who are in embassies and consulates do, and the outreach, and kind of we managed to reach a lot further than our size, and I think that's why I'm saying, if there is a cost, we shouldn't be shy of having the additional money to help the staff who are doing it, and if there is additional staff needed, which obviously there is, if we're opening additional embassies and consulate service, and I think we as a country will benefit hugely from that programme that's set out.
It's nothing.
Okay.
Thomas, we'll move to Programme E.
The Department's work in marshalling its human and capital resources at home and abroad to maximise Ireland's influence internationally. It includes the management and development of staff, the management and mitigation of risk, and compliance with statutory and legal obligations. The programme also covers communication by the Department of its policies, objectives and activities to citizens at home and abroad. Again, in the pay area, that's increased slightly for the reasons I outlined earlier. The other two budgets are more or less as they were, and there's a capital expenditure as well, isn't there, linked to this in terms of the
new missions?
New missions.
Yeah, the embassies.
Okay.
And Tokyo's in there.
Yeah, but not in those figures, is it?
It's in there.
It's in the 24 million. Okay, yeah, sorry. So in the non-pay section here, the 24 million, this programme includes a capital allocation of 9 million under E2, which is non-pay. So a big chunk of that will be for Tokyo, but also I outlined all the new missions that are opening at the moment. They either have to be leased or purchased. Most of them are leased in the short term until we can be satisfied that we can get good value to buy the right properties in the right places. And obviously we need the human resources to be able to do that as well in terms of property teams going to places like Santiago, Santiago as opposed to San Diego, Bogota, Oman. Some of these places need obviously proper sort of property management and planning, so that we get value for money.
Programme F appropriations in aid.
Yeah, so the Programme E, very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I turn to the income accruing under appropriations in aid, which is referred to in Programme F. The total income under the appropriations in aid in 2019 is 45 million. The primary source of income which accrues directly to the Exchequer from my department comes from the passport application fees, account for over 90, and those fees account for over 90% of the appropriations in aid receipts. Passport, citizenship, visa and other consular fees are set by way of statutory instrument under Section 3 of the Diplomatic and Consular Officers Provision of Services Act 1993. So, as you see there, virtually all of this is in the 41 million, which is the estimated figure for passport, visa, and other consular services. It may well be higher than that, but that's the figure that's been agreed with Deeper, I think, to put in the estimate. Last year the figure was higher than that, and it probably will be again this year. But that's the estimate figure that that's been recommended.
Okay. Thanks very much, Tánaiste. We'll now move to vote 27. Thank you, Tánaiste, for your engagement.
Thank you.
Welcome Minister Cannon and his officials to deal with vote 27. Now, Minister.
Thank you. And thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. And I welcome this opportunity to present the 2019 estimate for Vote 27, International Cooperation. Vote 27 funds about 2/3 of Ireland's official development assistance ODA programme, better known to the public as Irish Aid. The vote provides the funding necessary to deliver on the Department's high-level goal to work for a more just, a more secure and a more sustainable world. For this year, we're very proud to announce we have allocated almost €817 million to official development assistance, the highest increase in funding in over a decade. This represents an increase of approximately €110 million, or 16% on 2018 budget announced. €544 million will be managed by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade through Vote 27, International Cooperation, an increase of €44 million, or almost 9% on last year's allocation. A further estimated €272 million will be managed through other government departments and Ireland's share of the EU development cooperation budget. And by far the largest component of this element of ODA is our share of the EU development cooperation budget, which has grown significantly over the past few years, and significant ODA contributions also flow through the Departments of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Departments of Finance and Departments of Justice and Equality. The 2019 allocation is a significant budgetary commitment by the Government to international development and is an important statement of who we are as a people and a clear reflection of Ireland's values and interests. We all have a stake in making this place a better world, and expanding our development cooperation programme is an investment in a better, safer and ultimately more sustainable world. It provides Ireland with an opportunity to expand our influence and to strengthen our partnerships today and for tomorrow. Last year, when we published Global Ireland, the Government committed to delivering on the United Nations target of allocating 0.7% of gross national income (GNI) to official development assistance by 2030. Global Ireland also committed the Government to publishing a new white paper on international development. And last month we delivered on that commitment. I, along with the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, launched the Government's new policy for international development, A Better World. This new policy document provides the framework for the expansion of our ODA and to reaching the 0.7% target by 2030. Sustained and managed increments in ODA will be required to deliver on this commitment. Careful planning and consultation with other government departments and stakeholders will also be needed to ensure that this work is done effectively. We are adopting a steady and a phased approach, taking into consideration the range of demands across government and recognising that the need to deliver on this ambition will mean making difficult choices between competing priorities. We are, though, making progress, increasing allocations to ODA by some 32% since 2014 and 16% in this year alone. I want to thank this committee in particular for your work undertaken in 2017 in reviewing Ireland's aid programme. The recommendations from that work informed our thinking in developing our new international development policy. In particular, your recommendations on putting the SDGs to the fore, on prioritising gender equality, education and agriculture were of particular benefit, along with those related to strengthening our capacity to deliver an effective international development cooperation programme and to maintain Ireland's reputation for quality, untied aid and delivering results for those most in need. Our new policy, A Better World, sets out our vision for Ireland's contribution to international development looking forward to 2030. It's a very clear statement of Ireland's commitment to global citizenship, to helping make our planet a better place to live for others and for ourselves. It focuses on reaching the furthest behind first, wherever they might be, in a least developed country, a small island state vulnerable to climate change, or a victim of conflict, or indeed a humanitarian crisis. A Better World builds on Ireland's strengths as a donor and the strong international reputation we have maintained since the establishment of our official development programme. It's a bold statement of what Ireland will do to contribute to a more peaceful, equal and sustainable world in response to the underlying message of the SDGs to leave no one behind. It commits Ireland to scaling up resources and capacity across 4 policy priorities: gender equality, including a strengthened focus on education for girls, reducing humanitarian need, climate action and strengthening governance in developing countries. Our new policy also draws from Ireland's own history and our development journey, committing Ireland to intensifying our work in 3 clusters of interventions where we have already proven expertise: protection, food and people. This policy is a whole-of-government policy and commits us to both intensifying our contribution to development cooperation, but also to changing how we work. We are committed to working more effectively across all government departments with civil society, with research and education institutions in the private sector. And importantly, we will increase our investment in public engagement and outreach, which was a significant part of arriving at the policy we have arrived at. In conclusion, Chair, I want to say that Ireland does development really well. We have a well-earned reputation for the quality of our aid programme, recognised internationally, and being highly effective at reaching those in extreme poverty, again, which has been recognised internationally. What we do works and what we do has real impact. Ireland and we as an Irish people can be very proud of our international development cooperation policy and programme. We are reducing inequality, reducing poverty and reducing hunger. We bring our authentic experience to this work, delivering a world-class programme, helping to save lives, to build livelihoods and to bring life-saving humanitarian assistance to those most in need and in times of crisis. I welcome comments and questions from committee members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We all welcome the substantial increase in funding for the 2019 allocation, and we're sure it will be put to good use in some of the most deprived parts of the world. Deputy O'Sullivan.
And I have to apologise, I have to be gone by 4:15 just for an appointment. I totally agree with your conclusion. We do have a well-earned reputation, and it has come from the fact that our aid is untied. it's poverty focused, the way in which it is delivered, and we know so many examples of through our ambassadors and through our embassies and our contacts with NGOs and with missionaries. And I think it's so important that we hold on to that reputation. And if you like, I think the threats to it sometimes we have policy incoherence. And I've spoken about this before, and it comes from the tax area, it comes from the climate change, and it comes from the workers' rights areas also. But I think the positive has to be acknowledged here today. I know we have our partner countries, I know the focus is on Africa, but with the increase, I was just wondering, can we look further? And I'm speaking with my hat on now as chair of the Irish-Nepal Parliamentary Friendship Group. But because of being that chair, I've met quite a number of the Nepalese community here, and also Irish groups of people, Irish organisations who are involved in projects in education and health particularly. And I think, Nepal would tick a lot of the boxes in terms of an area that we could consider working with. I'm not saying you're going to take on another partner, but I would just ask that you could have a look at that because of the extent of the work that's going on there now. Another fear is around the EU Trust Fund. Because we know, and only today, we have another issue in Libya, in the Mediterranean, where refugees, migrants had taken over. They were rescued by a tanker which tried to land in Italy. It was pushed back. And we know that they do not want to go back to Libya because of what's happening in the centres there. So they're just two concerns, and apologies, but I have to leave shortly.
Minister?
Firstly, in relation to the reputation that we have developed and indeed are anxious to protect, I agree wholeheartedly with you, Deputy, particularly around the area of the aid remaining untied and focused on reaching those furthest behind. There is a question, there's no doubt, and you raise it quite rightly, of policy incoherence. There's no question about that, particularly in the area of climate change. And hopefully the work undertaken now by Minister Bruton in particular and also by the Oireachtas Committee on Climate Change will produce very, very positive results, and hopefully, because we need consensus here in terms of political consensus nationally, how exactly we're going to address that particular challenge so that we can stand up, particularly in the relationships we're now trying to develop with small island developing states around the world, seeking to amplify all of our collective voice in advocating for the kind of policy development that needs to happen internationally. We cannot stand on that stage without being able to show that we are, have a very far-seeing and progressive approach to that exact policy here in Ireland. In the area of and your issue with working with Nepal, we are already working with Nepal through an MOU with the HSE around standards in healthcare. I'm sure you're already aware of that, and there's no reason why we can't explore additional opportunities in the future.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Snoddy.
Yeah, in some ways this is the part, this is the good news part of a budget that kind of we can and we do, and even when we can't, that we kind of reach deep into our pockets and we try and help those who are less fortunate than ourselves. And I think that's why we have that reputation around the world of being one of those countries and a charitable people. And so you won't find any major criticism from myself, especially in relation to the untied aid. I'm here long enough to kind of to remember the commitments that everybody was making around the development goals and kind of how we would reach the 0.7% and how we're still now kind of way behind where we should have been, and kind of we can go back in time and criticise ourselves for not reaching it. I think it's laudable once again that we have set out a target and that we will hopefully reach it. It is a big commitment for Ireland, based on the figures that you've presented. You're talking about going from the 800 plus million that we give at the moment to nearly 2 billion. And kind of my view always is that it should be kind of more than that, but kind of that's the minimum. So the argument I have is in relation to some of that aid that is tied. It's the money that we give towards the European Development Fund and kind of where some of the EU's development cooperation budget goes. It's increased this year by 12% by us. And where it's spent well and in line with our own commitments and our own funding. It is laudable, but kind of there are questions in particular. I know my colleague who is standing in for Deputy Seán Crowe has raised concerns about the accountability and the transparency of the European Development Fund in particular, and particular concern about the EU Trust Fund for Africa. And that's the key one. The Trust Fund is the main financial instrument for the EU's political engagement with African partners, and what's happened of late, it has become very focused on migration rather than development, and kind of two are tied. But we've seen, kind of, and Deputy O'Sullivan mentioned the situation in Libya in particular, kind of people who are fleeing horrendous wars or horrendous humanitarian disasters in Africa, are ending up drowning in the seas in the Mediterranean, and if they are not drowning there, they're sent back to Libya, and some of the money that should be diverted towards, or should be spent on development in the countries that they are fleeing, is now being spent on trying to deal with a humanitarian crisis in some ways in Libya, but also in propping up a crazy regime which is guilty of vast human rights abuses. So it's a concern of that funding. It's not. My concern is on that. The other area that Deputy Crowe asked me in particular to raise was in relation to the AA5, the voluntary contributions to the UN and other development assistance. There was a presentation in the AV room yesterday by Financial Justice Ireland, and they had a speaker from Jubilee Caribbean. They pointed out the vast majority of countries that have been devastated by climate disasters caused by climate change. Many of those are heavily indebted, and they've been most affected by climate change, they're not the cause of it. They're suffering the consequences, and it costs hundreds of millions of dollars. And those countries are already heavily indebted. They have to go further into debt. They're forced to borrow more. So there is a question there is how we can help countries that are that indebted. Will we help in terms of additional aid to them? Can we call for the moratorium for debt or debt relief and for debt forgiveness for those countries affected by the likes of climate change? And Sinead?
Yes, and again, thank you, Deputy Syndic, for supporting the work we're doing in the department and outlining that ultimately we are a charitable people. We have that collective national memory of an extraordinary, difficult time in our history. And I think that resonates with us to this day, and probably will for many generations to come. And I think that's reflected always. And whenever we have the discussion in this particular room of that target of 0.7%, I'm always. So there's absolute political consensus, and this is what we need to do. And in a recent discussion in Seattle, where I presented Ireland's new Irish aid policy to a number of academics involved in international development worldwide, they're always immensely surprised to hear that we do have this absolute political consensus. Nobody's arguing for heading in the opposite direction in terms of our financial commitment. In relation to our commitment and the funds that we channel through the European Union, I have always believed that if you are going to have the maximum possible impact in terms of reaching those furthest behind in affecting global change, you need to partner with countries who share your values, share your ethos. And I think all of our EU partner countries very much share Ireland's ambition to reduce poverty, reduce injustice and address humanitarian need across the world. And I think we can actually have a far bigger impact in terms of the resources that we spend if we channel a significant amount of them to the European Union. We also have in place additional resources within our own department recently. 2 different units within the department overseeing our funds dispersed through the UN and through the European Union, to ensure that we do have the proper scrutiny in place, and that scrutiny, as the commitment increases, we have the resources to ensure that the monies are spent as best they can. You spoke also about the nations likely to be, and not likely to be, already are. In fact, I met with the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, a small island state in the Pacific, in New York last September, and to hear him tell me that if the current level of sea level rising continues, his country will cease to exist in 30 years. And these are the very real impacts being felt right now across particularly Pacific small island developing states, and we are very anxious to work with those states in mitigating the worst excesses of climate change. And we are involved right now in the development of a specific fund that Ireland will contribute to allow them to, I suppose, to insure against the worst excesses, the worst impacts of that climate change on their people, on their economies, as they become increasingly subject to those challenges in the future. So it's something that we're very aware of and something that we're working towards and are going to make a financial contribution towards in a very short space of time.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy McLoughlin.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Minister, just one question in relation to a better world of policy there for international development. And I see where you've prioritised committing Ireland to scaling up the resources for gender equality, reducing humanitarian need, climate action and strengthening governance in developing countries. What type of funding are we talking about, or what resources are you talking about in relation to helping under these various headings, please?
In relation to governance, we always describe the countries we work with in terms of our ODA programme as partner countries, and that's what we perceive them as to be. We want to partner with them in embarking on a journey very similar to the one that Ireland embarked on over the last 50 years. And while we are anxious to continue to commit funds to healthcare and to education and to gender equality in all of these locations, it's incredibly important that they have strong governance structures in place so that ultimately, having made these commitments in terms of funds, that the funds will have the maximum possible impact. So we work with governments in developing their health systems, in developing their education systems, in developing their expertise to be able to use these funds to the maximum possible impact. For example, we work with a number of African governments around developing what we perceive to be absolutely normal in this country, a social welfare system. And we have vast experience that we can share with them, where you see governments now using what they call social cash transfer models, transferring cash directly to women at the heads of households across Africa, and having a very, very significant impact in lifting them out of poverty. We're also focusing hugely on girls in education, and ultimately, I think if you look at the long-term solution for gender inequality internationally, girls in education is one of the key solutions to unlocking that problem. And again, we're investing very, very heavily in girls in education, and in particular where in many countries where young girls drop out of education in their early teens, never to return. So we do have some really powerful programs there in supporting those girls in remaining in education. So they're the primary areas that we're investing in. And as I said, the governance issue is huge because, you can continue to disperse funds, but if the partner country you're working with doesn't have the expertise at government level and indeed at civil society level to use those funds effectively and to actually have a legacy impact that sustains long after the funds are gone, then you're on a hiding to nothing. So ultimately that's why we work on strengthening those.
Thanks, Minister. Minister, again, I want to welcome the substantial increase in funding, and we realise it will be put to very good use through direct programmes and also through your assistance to the various NGOs and through other international organisations as well. And on behalf of the committee, I take the opportunity to thank the many Irish people, indeed their international colleagues as well, who are working in some of the most difficult situations in the world. And we have given some of the practitioners, be it nurses, doctors or other workers who have been literally out working in those crisis hit areas, we've given them the opportunity to make presentations at this committee. But I think it's important that we record our appreciation of their work in very difficult and dangerous places as well. Minister, I attended a seminar last Thursday night at Lone Institute of Technology on climate action and the need for climate action. and it was organised by my colleagues, Deputies Eugene Murphy, Robert Troy and Barry Cowan. Just at that discussion, it was a very well attended meeting, people of all age groups. I made the point that due to the great empathy the Irish people have shown with the poorest in the world over the centuries now, going back to our own history of famine and poverty and hunger, that maybe if we, in the whole debate about climate change and the need for climate action and the need to protect the environment, if we were able to tie in a better message to our own people that the biggest victims of climate change are the poorest people in the world, that maybe it would help to create a greater awareness among all of us that we all need to be doing more, and that it would be to benefit the poorest people and the regions that are hardest hit as well. So maybe if there was somebody work done about trying to tie in that awareness in a better way, I think it could resonate with the public as well. And I just made the point last week at that meeting in Athlone Institute that we had just seen days previously the huge devastation in Mozambique, Malawi, and also in Zimbabwe, and particularly the Beira region in Mozambique as well, the huge loss of life and literally areas wiped out. And I remember when we visited Mozambique and Malawi as well, it was forcefully brought home to us in regard to rising water levels and their insecure future as well. So maybe if there was a determination some way to get the message across that here are the people who are going to continue to be the biggest victims in the world and continue to be kept in poverty because of climate change. And one area, and I appreciate your kind and generous remarks regarding the report that we drew up as a committee as well. We focused on a number of particular areas, the whole area of gender equality and the need to ensure that we keep women and girls in education as well. During our trip to Malawi, and I remember when we were out meeting the agronomists who were teaching persons the skills in growing potatoes and managing crops and that. I remember one of the officers said to us there, our ambition is to get the women to come to the classes in the school because they will listen and they'll pass on that knowledge as well. So it emphasised to me the importance of ensuring that girls and women got that educational opportunity. And one other issue, we had Professor Jerry Boyle, Director General of Teagasc here with us, and you know they are playing a role in the whole area of knowledge transfer and that. Is there further progress being made in ensuring that the private sector would be more generous in participating in programmes in the developing countries, maybe ensuring that some of their relatively young retired staff will put their skills, experience and knowledge to good use in those countries, maybe over a short period of time? And of course many of those big Irish international corporations today, they have the capacity to spend money in those countries, and relatively small money in their terms would, as we all know, would do so much in those developing countries. But I think the whole area of knowledge transfer and that interchangeability, I think it could bring so much benefit at very little cost to the Exchequer and would do so much good, and obviously on the whole development side as well.
I couldn't agree more with you around the whole issue of climate change. And what I find fascinating, and I would love to hear more about that meeting in Athlone, because I mean you could describe Athlone itself as a place that experienced the worst excesses of climate change, and I mean underwater for most of the early 2016. There's an emerging public consensus here that we need to do something and we need to do it urgently, and that public consensus needs to be reflected in the words of the people who sit in this building, those public representatives who represent those people. And as I said earlier on to Deputy O'Sullivan, you know, we need to show absolute consistency in terms of the policy we're espousing worldwide and the policies we're implementing here on the ground in Ireland. And we found that in arriving at this, our own new international development policy, that the public engagement meetings we had around the country were really, really helpful and really informative. And again, I suppose, you know, I mentioned earlier on there's absolute consensus around this room about the 0.7%. We found the exact same to apply in every conversation we had in Dublin, Cork, Sligo, Limerick and Galway. So I think we need to engage in a similar exercise when it comes to climate change. to tell the story that I've told a few minutes ago of that island in the Pacific that won't be around in 30 years' time. I saw a map created by a geography department, I can't remember which, one of our third-level institutions here in Ireland, mapping out Ireland in 2100 if the current level of sea rising. And I was contemplating moving a little bit further inland when I saw it, because there's a significant impact waiting out there for us if we don't act on this and act on it urgently. So, there's really, really good work being done in the committee chaired by my colleague Hildegard Naughton, equally so by Minister, and equally so by all colleagues across the Oireachtas. And we need, perhaps, those of us who share these concerns need to be a little more vocal, a little more courageous in the things we say in the public domain, and not to point out the very serious urgency with which we must treat this particular issue. I agree completely also with you in the area of Ireland's expertise, renowned international expertise in agriculture, and how we can use that to assist people in our partner countries. I was very happy to be able to launch with Minister Creed last year a programme of collaboration between the Department of Agriculture and our own department, where we supported Irish agri-tech companies in establishing their first-time presence in Africa. One of the main reasons, and this was discussed actually in Seattle last week, a lot of people involved in agri-tech internationally, one of the main reasons that most innovative agri-tech companies are afraid to invest in Africa is the risk associated with it. It's simply they don't know what they're going into in terms of national government, in terms of policy, the ground moving beneath their feet the whole time. So what governments internationally are doing, what this government is doing, is trying to remove some of that risk or insure those companies against that and support them, that knowing that we have your back and going in there, making your first-time presence felt in these economies and collaborating with emerging and very, very impressive African agri-science, agri-tech companies. We also have an MOU with Chagos, our department does, again looking to see that science implemented on the ground. We have NGOs like Self-Help Africa doing extraordinary work in assisting farmers, first of all, to increase their production and become more efficient in production, and then to seek out and secure new markets for their produce. And we also now, and you mentioned earlier on the private sector, their role to play, we have a consultancy looking at private sector engagement in the development of a more efficient, a more scientifically underpinned agricultural economy across the whole of Africa. And that's work that's actually now happening as a result of our new policy, A Better World.
Thanks, Minister. Are we involving our institutes of technology and universities, say, whether agri-science part?
Most definitely. Most definitely. I actually was with the Irish Research Council earlier on this week. We launched a new partnership where the Irish Aid will not, because Irish Aid has been funding a lot of research across our third-level institutions over the last number of decades at this point, but an even more enhanced relationship in the future. And we had a presentation in the Royal College of Surgeons earlier this week from a number of different researchers who are doing research work right now that's part funded by Irish Aid, part funded by the Irish Research Council. Science Foundation Ireland have a role to play as well in carrying out research that will have an impact here in Ireland in terms of how we plan for the future of this country, but also will have a significant impact across our partner countries as well. So any time that the research that's happening here can also resonate or have an effect worldwide, that's the kind of research we want to support.
Thanks, Minister. As we've now completed our consideration of revised estimates for vote 27 and vote 28, the Clerk would send a message to that effect to the Clerk of the Dáil in accordance with Standing Order 90. Under Standing Order 89.2, the message is deemed to be the report of the committee. This select committee is adjourned sine die, and our joint committee will meet next Thursday, the 4th of April. Thank you very much, Minister, and your officials.